Thank you for joining the Doctor Whisperer. I am your host, Sharon Feckety, and I am happy to bring you a show where we talk about the business of medicine. I hope that you enjoy it. Please feel free to share, subscribe, and pass it on. Enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. I am, as always, your host and happy to be here with you today, having a conversation about contract negotiations. So I was just saying to our guest, who I will introduce in just a moment, that since this show has been in existence, 2018, I have yet to have this conversation, and it is an important one. So first and foremost, I would like to welcome Ethan Nkana to the show, who is the founder of RMPA Advocates. Welcome, Ethan.
Yeah, Sharon, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute delight to be here with you.
Well, I have to say the same because you have some cool stories. Your mom is a doctor, so that means it's personal. And we need more bodyguards out there for our doctors, don't you?
I love it. Bodyguards. That's how I feel a lot of the time. I don't know that I've ever used that word, but that's perfect. The perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, feel free to take that because we do need more. It'll be another side hustle maybe. But I want to get started with this great introduction. You know, I always get a bio from everybody before we do an interview, and I actually read them because I'm interested. And Ethan's bio starts by saying, HR called Ethan into his boss's office late on a Friday afternoon, and he quickly realized what was coming next. The day before his 36th birthday would be the last of his 6 years of service with the organization. And then I know that you have this wonderful photo book called Shit to Remember When You Lose Your Job, which I cannot wait to have the link to because I want to see those pictures. So why don't you give us that little story before we dive into contract negotiations and all that, profesh stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up when we were chatting before the show. I'm glad that you mentioned that we wanted to talk about that because I think it's often misconstrued how entrepreneurs or successful people get to where they are. And people say, oh, well, look at what they've accomplished. And that must have just happened overnight, not seeing all of the trauma that
it is trauma. Yes,
it is. As you were talking about that, I had a pit in my stomach, feeling that feeling I had that Friday afternoon as HR walked me into my boss's office and said, hey, at this point, after 6 months in this role, I'd been with the organization for 6 years, progressively growing in responsibility. And then that Friday, I had been in that role for about 6 months, and they said, hey, we're going to close the department. And as of next week, you will be out of a job. And that was the most pivotal moment in my journey, but also the lowest moment in my journey. And the reason I say that is because I had so much of my identity wrapped up in my job, Sharon, wrapped up in my title and my salary. And so when I didn't have that, I didn't know who I was, what I was. And if I'm just being completely honest, maybe this will resonate with someone in your audience, but I would walk into, let's say, a coffee shop. I would spend the day job searching, working my resume.
Yeah.
And I would feel as though everybody there knew I was unemployed.
Right.
And it's like, oh, there goes that guy who lost his job. And that became my scarlet letter, so to speak. So, as you talk about that, it's bringing back some of those vivid memories of just how difficult that time period was for me.
Well, I really appreciate you bringing that up. And maybe I'm going to have you back on another show that I host called The Broken Road to Mental Health in Life and in Business, because what most employers don't know is that the worst day to terminate anybody is a Friday. And have been studies shown that more people will die by suicide because they've lost their job on a Friday, because they will have that weekend then to think about how much, as you mentioned, their identity is caught up in their role, in their position. So I really think that although we will be talking about contract negotiations eventually, I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't think enough people realize how vital it is to understand how to let go an employee and then, have some type of maybe services available when they are let go. So anyway, we digress. Maybe another conversation on another show because I like it. But I do realize that this probably, after all of the trauma and the hurt through that, coming up with this wonderful entrepreneurial journey to create this company to help physicians. And I love that, bio in one sentence, talent agent who negotiates deals for doctors instead of professional athletes and actors is really good. I like it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That was not the first version, I will say. It's been tweaked quite a bit over the last few years.
Oh, yeah. Well, my company name was going to be Get Up and Grow, just so you know.
Oh, there you go. I love the Dr. Whisperer, though.
Yeah, thank you.
I told you that before we started the show. I love that.
Thank you. Well, so Ethan, tell me a little bit about, so what was that like? So now you were working in a hospital, is that correct?
Yeah. You mentioned my mom's a physician, and growing up, she always told me, Ethan, find a job in medicine and you'll always have a job. People will always be sick. She didn't have an appreciation for the fact that I have no skills in the sciences. And so likewise. So I'm in good company.
Yes.
So my pathway to being in medicine was through hospital administration. So, I've spent the last 15 years of my career doing one thing, and that's working in hospitals, everywhere from finance, legal, physician contracting to operations and strategy. So I've been really fortunate to see and have a holistic experience and exposure to how a hospital runs, which is helpful for my business now.
Oh my goodness, so much. So before you get into it, I will just share one thing about how vital Ethan's role is. And I love that we're having this conversation because I can think of, 30 doctors that need your services. When I moved here to Florida from New York, I was, what was my title? Something ridiculous, like director of something. And really what I was doing was reviewing policies and procedures. We were an independent physicians association. So, right. So a lot of physicians will get involved with these IPAs. So they have a better negotiating power with the insurance companies, right? Because a privately held physician office versus a doctor in a hospital or a large multi-physician practice, multi-specialty, they have more negotiating power. And if they're surgeons versus primary care or pediatrics, which is what I was in this independent physicians association, they came for the negotiating power, right? So I think what the doctors thought we were doing in this association, and I will tell you, I only was there for 6 months because I didn't really like what was going on. I quit. I think they thought we really were going and negotiating with each insurance company and getting the best rate for those individual doctors. Yes, we had more negotiating power, but we might have been going to the lunch with United Healthcare, but that was it. So sorry about that, but that's what was really happening. So Ethan, can you identify with anything I've just mentioned?
Absolutely. And I say that very frequently, at least once a month, to physicians. So the side that I tend to work on with doctors is I represent doctors typically in negotiations with their employer, with their hospital employer, private practice employer, private equity. Every now and then I do work with private practice doctors. And this, like you said, that idea of leverage and power in numbers resonates entirely, because I always tell doctors, you will have, and I like how you bifurcated between surgeons and family practice and pediatrics, because there are meaningful distinctions there in the revenue generation of capabilities. But I often tell my doctors, if you join up with a couple of your buddies or your colleagues, you will have more power in that discussion with your employer about your salary or the terms of your contract than you will if you try to go it by yourself. And the counter to that is anytime I work with groups, I often tell them, I totally appreciate that you have a relationship with your employer, but for the purposes of this process, your communication's got to go through me. Because what they're going to try to do is divide and conquer. Oh, well, Dr. Smith, you actually deserve more than Dr. Jones. And we can't have that. So we need to keep a collective, united front. And just like with insurance companies, that's why those private practices group up together, because it gives them more of a voice and leverage in the discussions.
Yeah. And, it's so vital because I think as an independent consultant now, 10 years removed from running practices, it was easy for me to see in the practices that I had run before working with doctors very closely that they were really great at not one thing, okay, but just for purpose of this podcast today.
You can say
right. They're great at treating patients, right? So when it would come to even negotiating a lease, they were like, oh, we got the contract, great, let's sign it. Oh, what? No, that is not what we do. We actually start to have a negotiation, right? Because your value as a physician group being in this space, just like your mom so smartly said, if you get a job in medicine, it's probably never going to go away. Well, everybody wants the physicians to be in these spaces, and the hospitals certainly need the best of the best. What tends to happen is the doctor is, I love the philosophy of a physician because they're put on this earth to help people.
Yes.
They don't always stand up for themselves and know how to do that. So to have you to help them through that experience is so powerful. So what has it been like since you started this business of yours and working with doctors?
This is the first time in my career where I feel like there is a complete alignment between my skill set and my purpose. The doctors that I get to work with fill my cup.
Yeah.
I could not, and you probably experienced this when you're working with the smartest people in any room. And like you mentioned a moment ago, and like I said, we're among friends, so we can talk about this, but there is this breadth of things that doctors know and do. But then when it comes to business, their knowledge base is very, very limited because they've spent so much focus and energy on medicine. Most of my clients are made up of the doctors you just mentioned. The doctors who in their first contract, they just signed it and they didn't realize all of the implications and the barbs that are included in that contract that shackle them to that employer. Or really where I tend to have traction with doctors is like they find out that they're making 30% less than the doctor next to them,
right,
doing the same work. So as much as I feel bad and empathize with doctors for the disadvantage that they have relative to the skill set and training, it's how I make my money, right. Because they don't have that. That's my specialty. That's what I do. And so it's kind of cool to have this one little tiny part of the world that I know, and it just so happens to overlap with this tiny part of the world that doctors don't have a ton of exposure to.
Well, yeah, right. Like, I can't tell you how many people have told me, oh, Sharon, you picked the smartest industry because, doctors aren't great at business. And I'm a bodyguard, right? So
yeah.
I'm like, well, that's very easy to say, but they also could probably do brain surgery on you. And so we don't actually want them to be good at business, that we want them to hire professionals that can be the experts that they are in whatever field they are and trust in them. But therein lies the conundrum of the physician mindset of not being able to trust everybody so much. So kudos to, I love that your mom is a doctor. It also probably helps a lot, Ethan, let's be real, because if you know what, I had a mother as a doctor, or if I was a doctor, I'd have that shit tattooed across my forehead.
That's going to be my next tattoo, Sharon. I love it.
Right here, right across the forehead.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
But you got to see that for yourself with your mom, I assume. What was that like?
I don't know that I had a true appreciation for her experience until starting this.
Mm.
Because growing up, it wasn't, and I say this respectfully, but like, it wasn't special that my mom was a doctor. That was my mom.
Yeah.
And cooked us dinners and took us to
Right.
games. And so I never saw that as different. I just saw that that's her career. And as I went to law school, business school, worked in hospitals. And then when I came to this side representing doctors, I truly began to have an appreciation for what she went through. And the stories, it contextualized the stories she told me growing up about discussions with her employers or her partners. And one thing in particular I'll share, when I started the firm, my mom said to me, Ethan, pay special attention to women physicians. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? She said, there are parts of the experience of a physician that women go through differently than men.
Sure.
And I said, okay, well, I'll do some research. I don't know. And if I'm being honest, Sharon, I didn't really buy it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to me, a doctor's a doctor. You guys are the smartest in any room.
Right.
There shouldn't be any lines drawn. But now that I'm, a few years into this, I can tell you, as you likely know, with full certainty and supported by data, women physicians are taking a discount relative to their male counterparts for no other reason than the fact that they're women. Mm-hmm. And, I don't know that I necessarily have an appreciation for the researched reasons why that is. To me, ultimately, let's just fix it. Let's just fix it, get the data, get those disparities into the hands of physicians so that it's not a black box. So doctors do know what numbers they should be asking for. And I do see a big part of my job as helping balance the playing field for physicians who are in vulnerable positions.
Yeah. Ethan, part of the story I tell when I talk about my business is that because I work mostly with private practice doctors that have, I like to say, broken out of corporate. They've been in this insurance model for a long time. They've worked in the hospital. They've joined the big group. They thought they were going to make partner in 2 years. And then they realized that they only have 35 seconds with the patients. I'm exaggerating, but we're trying to make a point here. And then they really want to branch out on their own. And there's so much fear with that. So when it comes to post residency, most physicians don't go into business on their own. They join a big practice or they join a hospital because they have, I don't know, $25 million to pay back in student loan that they're never going to make working on their own. And they're going right from school, not knowing about business, to now negotiating one of the biggest contracts. And unfortunately, your mom is so right about how women get treated so differently, because as an administrator, I had a lot more men as partners, and the women, even though I am one, I was in that conversation about how we weren't going to bring this doctor on for this amount, even though the male physician prior came in at a bigger jump.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Can we pause there for a second? And
sorry, everybody.
No, like you can share as much as you're comfortable, but I am so deeply intrigued by your perspective on that experience. When you saw that, and you don't have to dramatize if I'm poking too deep, but like, was there anything going through your head at that moment? Like, man, this is kind of odd or weird or not right. Given you, like, what was going through your mind?
Well, I'll tell you very transparently, the fact that I was running these big medical offices, I never felt worthy enough to do that because I was working with physicians. So I didn't feel, no matter what they said, they were the ones with MD or DO after their name, and I wasn't. So there was a lot of, well, I'm certainly not going to stand up right now for women. Now, there's literally no way that would happen today. I wrote a whole book about, mental health in the workplace. And I also changed the logo because unfortunately, even when I made my logo, I had it me whispering to a male physician.
Huh, interesting.
And if I was to make that today, it would have been a woman. I at least put pink in there. But it's so ingrained, right? And it is, and I've had so many bad experiences with really just unfair treatment of a lot of female physicians that I think now I mostly work with female physicians. And I'm very proud to, and I think I work extra hard mostly because of what you just asked me.
Yeah.
I don't get to talk about that much, but that is my truth.
Are you still running your medical practice like it's 1990? Well, what about Riva Global Medical Virtual Assistants? A medical virtual assistant, I promise you, is the way to run your medical practice today. Why? Because you can save, I don't know, thousands of dollars. No more paying for health insurance, no more worrying about office space. You also have trained professionals. These wonderful human beings get trained, and they have a client service manager that makes sure that your VA that you're working with for your practice is hitting all the goals that you need to make sure that your practice is run efficiently and friendly. Check out Riva Global Medical Virtual Assistants today.
We interrupt this awesome podcast to share with you about our sponsor, TIE Technology. TIE Technology was founded with the thought that every customer deserves exceptional customer services. So if you know of any company that has a phone system where the auto attendant doesn't really sound good, you press 1 and you think you're going to go to a live person, but you end up with a broken recording, it's probably time that you call TIE Technology. And if you mention this podcast, you will get the first 3 months for free. So make sure you mention the Dr. Whisperer podcast show. Check them out.
Yeah, thank you for talking about it. I know that that's a difficult thing to talk about, especially in mixed company.
Mm-hmm.
But man, that means a lot to me that you'd be willing to share what was going through your head. And I think that probably resonates with the experience of other women in that position, I would imagine.
Well, if we want to take that to the next level, Ethan, most practice administrators don't even have the qualifications to negotiate, or they don't know how to do contracts. Like what you're saying is, man, we can have a whole conversation about the people that get promoted. They go from the front office answering the phone and all of a sudden they're the hospital administrator, you know, like that's the reality of when you've been in medical for so long. And both my parents worked in hospitals in New York. So it has been in my blood, in my life for so long that being this bodyguard is so important now. And I almost, wanted to give up working with doctors altogether, but I can't because I just love and know that they need people that really want to fight for them, which is what you're doing.
There's not many. I will tell you, Sharon, like I can count probably on 2 hands now, the people who I've interacted with like you, who have a lens that is squarely focused on doctors. There's, and I don't mean to disparage anyone who's not, because there's a need, but I think there is, and that's why I think the Dr. Whisperer is so salient, because they are not like everyone else.
No,
they're very unique. And I just, living with my mom, growing up with her, I've learned so much about how they view the world. And 70% of my clients now are women. And so I've learned a lot of lessons over the past few years about the experience of women physicians. And I care so much more deeply now than I did before. Now, even seeing some of those horror stories that my mom talked to me about.
I also think that there's a great advantage when you've actually been in it. There's so many consultants today. There's so many advisors today, but they've never been in the system. And added layer of that to have your own mother be the physician. There's so many levels of that. So a lot of people have asked me, like, how do you get referred so much? Well, I have 20 plus years working with doctors. Like that's how. And I only get referred usually through other doctors.
Yeah. And that's a blessing and a curse, right? Because their doctors are really tight knit, but once they trust you, they trust you.
They trust you. Yes. It's just like, you know, if you're Irish like me, like I hired an Irish bookkeeper first. It's like, well, we all speak the same language. You know, when I moved here from Florida, I was looking for New Yorkers, right? We want to stay in our own tribe. And we need people that understand who we are. And physicians are, you know, I could go on for days about how much I love them and how talented they are, and how, like, if people only knew, they only see certain things, right? Like when you see that doc driving the Porsche that's only 32, don't think for a second they didn't take out a freaking big ass loan for that to keep up with all their friends. You know, they're not making that kind of money yet. But they have to look a certain way. It's so much that comes with that. But Ethan, why don't you share a little bit about like exactly what you do for these doctors? Because I really know that there are so many physicians that could use your services, especially the ones coming out of medical schools, right? Like you should be there teaching a course, Ethan.
I am regularly at residency programs doing education. I did one last week. I think it was University of Colorado last week. But I regularly do education for residents, physicians in training on salary and contract negotiation for exactly the reasons that you've already outlined, Sharon. But, you know, when I think about the work that I get to do, it helped to illustrate by a story, if that's okay. Last summer, I was approached by an attorney here. I live in Denver. The attorney is also local to Denver, and he reached out and said, hey, I have 6 OBGYN physicians who are currently employed by a large national health system, just like many doctors, and they want to move to private practice. And I said, well, that's a big change. So tell me more about the rationale. And really what it turned out is that they were really frustrated with their employer and didn't know what options they had. And so I ended up working with the group, worked closely with the attorney. I worked with a number of attorneys. And what we ended up finding is that really the issue was these 6 women OBGYNs were individually contracted as employees with that health system. And to the earlier point of our conversation, they said collectively, Ethan, we recognize that there's power in numbers, so we'd like for you to advocate for us individually, but as a collective. So which means that you have 6 individual priorities, preferences, insecurities, and interests, but you also have 6 people who are aligned towards the same goal of we're committed to getting the value that we deserve. So what we did is the first thing I did is I went around town and I said, I have this amazing group of dynamic women physicians who are exploring their options. Who's interested? Everybody in town was interested, spoiler alert. And so my job then was to bring them offers. So those doctors spent the summer getting wined and dined while they're caring for patients. I get to do all of the wheeling and dealing in the background, the contract reviews, negotiations, that type of stuff. So doctors don't have to worry about taking time away from caring for patients to do this work. I do it all for them. And then ultimately we got to the 11th hour. We had signed an extension for 3 months and said, hey, we want to commit to get this deal done. But we also understand we're still really far away on some of these issues that the doctors had outlined. Long story long, what we ended up doing is 3 days before the final extension expired, the CEO of the doctors of their hospital called me and said, Ethan, what number do we have to hit? And I just said the biggest number that I could say without getting laughed off the phone.
Right.
And that's what we got.
Yes.
And so collectively, it ended up being about $1 million a year.
Wow.
Guaranteed base salary. So for each doctor, that's about $180,000 a year. But, you know, that really, I think, helps illustrate the point that doctors are really good at what they do. I do one thing, and that is create opportunities so that you can make more money, period.
Right. I love it. I love it. What a great skill, number one. And what a great service. Really, what a great service. So I know that you have your, oh God, now where did it go? You have this degree, your JD. And I honestly never heard of that before. I don't have any problem admitting that. I never knew of a Juris Doctor. And you have your master's in business administration, another tattoo you might want to consider, Ethan. Maybe you could put it along the side.
I'm going to be tatted up at the
right. You know, I can't tell you how many doctors have never asked me actually if I have my MBA, but when they're hiring somebody, because they just assume I have it, which is also funny, which I dropped out of college. So that's also funny, but that they don't do that research. They just assume there's a lot of assumptions happening. But I know that they want people that have great credentials, and you have these great credentials. So can you explain a little bit about why you decided to go and get that degree on top of an MBA?
Yeah, you know, a Juris Doctorate is the degree that every attorney has, except that licensed attorneys will then sit for the bar after law school, and then they cross that threshold of becoming licensed attorneys. When I went to law school, I never wanted to be an attorney. I know that sounds a little bit...
It sounds very reasonable to me. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds, people who don't want to be lawyers go to law school. So when I went to law school with the specific intent of becoming a hospital CEO.
Interesting.
I wanted, so going back to my mom's kind of idea, like, hey, be in medicine. It's like, well, if I'm going to be in medicine, I want to be the one who runs. I want that responsibility of a community's health on my shoulders. And so going to law school was what I thought would be a good skill set to run a hospital. You're going to have issues with law, and you're going to have issues with doctors and Stark and it's a kickback and all those things. And so law school prepared me for the work that I do now, because I went without the intent of taking the bar. So I studied Medicare and Medicaid. I studied healthcare law. I studied all of these things that were interesting to me, but not necessarily in preparation for the bar. And one cool thing, and I've never actually shared this with anyone, but one cool thing that happened that it kind of brings all of this full circle. When I was in law school, I was doing what's called a directed reading, which means that you focus a semester on studying a topic. My topic was Medicare and Medicaid in America. And my professor, Dr. Vernelia Randall, during that time, she told me, Ethan, you should manage physician practices. You should help physician practices manage their business, because you have this really good skill set of background in healthcare and a law degree. And I thought, I want to be a hospital CEO. So doctors, I'm intimidated by them. And now when I think about the manifestation of the work that I do now, it's very similar to what she had seen in me over 10 years ago now. It means so much to me that, one, that she believed in me to see like, hey, there's an opportunity for you to help doctors. I couldn't see it at the time. Right. But that academic foundation was so important, because I review contracts on a weekly basis. I talk with my lawyers on a weekly basis. There's all kinds of things that skirt around the law that are important for me to know about. But anytime we need to call the big guns in, if there's a threat of a doctor getting sued, that's where I would truly call in my licensed attorneys who I have on retainer. But my background, long way around it, Sharon, my background really was to prepare me to be a hospital CEO, getting the law degree and the MBA.
Very interesting. Are we glad today that we are not a hospital CEO, Ethan?
I could not be happier with what I've done.
That is fantastic. So before we wrap up, I have to know, and I'm going to ask you now if I could do a part 2, because I'd really like to help the doctors with negotiating. So I'd like to maybe just do an episode where we're talking about negotiating. I had a doctor asked me the other day, he said, I have a doc that's coming in, and he wants to rent out one of my offices on the day that I'm not there. He said, I know how good you are at negotiating. I just need a little bit of advice. I said, just be quiet. Right?
I say, shut up, Sharon.
Listen, one of my favorite, and you'll appreciate this. I have this amazing attorney. He's been on the show before, Jeff Goodis. He knows I adore him. He's a malpractice attorney here in Tampa Bay. And he taught me when I was running this practice years ago. We've stayed friends. He He said, you need to tell that doctor to ATFQ. And I'm like, ATFQ, huh? And I knew he was a storyteller, it's what he did. And he loved to talk. And I'm like, and you're an attorney. I used to work for attorneys back in the day. So I said, answer the fucking question. That's it, isn't it?
I love it. I love it. ATFQ.
ATFQ. And I'll tell you what, I've said that to more doctors through the years, like, you don't need to tell a story. You just got to answer that question, yes or no.
Man, that's great. I really like that. And it's resonating with a situation that I'm in right now where that could be a really good advice.
Yeah. And they never forget it. Yeah. ATFQ. Yeah. And they never come up with it. I'm like, wow, man, you never spent any time in New York, did you? So, okay, this is it. I know. I know this might not be politically correct, but who cares? You have to remember this. So yeah, I'd love for you to come back and do something that I really think could really help them. And I know that you also have this degree in, public relations, like how important that is for doctors. Yeah. Oh, Lord. It's really, really amazing what you've been able to do, but you've been this entrepreneur now for the last 2 years.
Going on three years. Yeah, I am officially in year 3 now.
Okay. So, there's a lot of fear that is wrapped up in entrepreneurship. And I want to know what it was like for you in that first year and how it is today in comparison.
Yeah, the first year was really hard, really, really hard. And I often say to people that if I would go back to 2019 and have this idea without losing my job, I would not have had the guts to do it.
Right.
Losing my job helped me understand and see the game for what it is. Like, there's no safety here. Mm-hmm. This idea of the safe route, like, that's not a thing. I cried a lot my first year. It was really hard. Mm-hmm. I got my feelings hurt quite a bit because going back to that job and identity thing, like the job is me. RMPA is me. There's nobody else. It is me. It's my idea. It's my business. And so I took some lumps that first year. My counselor was super helpful. I see her once a month. She was extremely helpful during that time, developing skills and reminders about, like, you were built for this. What I will say now is, and I say this so respectfully, I don't mean this in like an arrogant way, but I made more in my second year by myself than I did in my 15th year working in a W-2 job.
Yeah.
And now, like, yes, I cried a bunch my first year. It was super hard. I gave myself initially at a 6-month financial runway with what I had in savings. And my partner and I said, well, if you can't make it work in those 6 months, you got to go find a job. Right. Fortunately, I got my first check in month 5, which was great. But more important than that, that time was full of uncertainty. Mm. It was full of doubt, fear, anxiety, self-deprecation. I mean, all kinds of things. Like, who are you to build this thing and then call yourself an agent and then act like you know what you're doing? I mean, there were times where I was really hard on myself. And now I was talking with a buddy yesterday, and I get calls from people who I don't know who say, hey, I heard you do this thing. Can you help me? Mm. And that to me is the most fulfilling feeling, because it validates what I've been through the past 2.5 years. Mm. It validates the posting on social media every day. It validates the days where I didn't know if it was going to work, but I still sent those emails. I still got up and did the things that I knew I needed to do to have the business be successful, not knowing how it would actually turn out. And yes. I couldn't be more fulfilled, Sharon, with where I am today. And all I see is the sky from here. Yes.
I was at the nail salon this morning, and the nail technician said to me, oh, you have off today? And that's exactly what I did.
Right now.
Right. I laughed and I said, oh, I'm always working.
Exactly.
But I got
Isn't
this
that
great
funny,
thing.
though? Like,
Yeah, I'm like, I got this phone and that helps me run a business from anywhere I go.
that to me is such a fascinating experience being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Because yes, there are certain days where I have to have my butt in the chair, going through a contract or working on a strategy for a doc. But also there are days where I'm out taking a walk and I'll be talking to a client, or, you know, I'm out at the museum and I'll get a call from a client or review something. So it's such an interesting like experience to like be out and sweat sometimes. It's like, oh yeah, I could be working, talking to a client.
Yeah,
Very, very
totally.
different.
It is. And it is the best decision that you probably never thought you could have ever made, because your
Yes.
identity was wrapped so much in that. And, you know, I learned this, one of my dentist clients said something I've never forgotten, was we would talk a lot about terminating his employees. And he said, you know what, Sharon, you know what we're doing? We're just freeing up their future.
Yeah.
And that's really stuck with me. Like
Yes.
sometimes it does take that to free up somebody else's future. So they did, even though it didn't feel like a damn favor, but they did you the greatest service they could have ever done by letting you go, and their damn loss. And if you're listening, people, stop firing people on Fridays, big dummy. Right? It's not about making it easy for you. We got to start caring more about the people that work for us.
Yeah.
You know, if you've committed some time of your life to making somebody else some money, we have to start thinking more of the mental health of the people that would be leaving that position. It's a very fragile conversation to have. So I'm glad that that's how we started, and we'll have to continue this, Ethan. So all of the information of how to get in touch with Ethan will be in the show notes, and look forward to doing part 2 with you if you'll do me that service. And
Oh, it would be a delight. Are you kidding?
yay! Thank you, Ethan.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Sharon. Thanks for having me today.
So if you want to party like it's 1999, but run your medical practice like it's 2022, don't forget to check out Riva Global Medical Virtual Assistants.
So don't forget, if you mention that you've seen the show or listened to it on the podcast, mention Thai Technology and you will get 3 months for free.